The wind had a voice that morning, a dry, whispering one that warned of danger long before Evelyn Hart heard the first gunshot. The sun was barely climbing over the New Mexico desert, staining the cliffs in copper and gold. Evelyn's small wagon train had been on the move since dawn, heading west toward the ranch her late husband left behind, a patch of dry land she'd never seen but was determined to claim. She was done being pitied, done being told a woman couldn't live alone on the frontier. She'd grown up in Kansas, knew how to load a rifle, and had buried her husband without crying in front of anyone. But when the first arrow hissed through the air and struck the wagon wheel beside her, all her hard-won courage turned to ice. The riders came out of nowhere, a blur of paint horses, war cries, and dust. Men with faces marked in black and red. The mules screamed and someone yelled, "Apaches!" The wagon master fired blindly into the hills. It didn't matter. Within moments, the fight was over. 3 men lay dead in the dirt. The others fled into the canyons, leaving their wagons to burn. Evelyn stood alone beside the smoking ruins, her heart thudding so hard it hurt. Then she saw him. He rode slowly through the haze like something carved from the desert itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a necklace of white shell beads that gleamed against his dark chest. His eyes, black as obsidian, locked on hers. The others fell silent as he dismounted. Chief Catan, the Apache king. Evelyn had heard the name whispered in saloons and trading posts. The settlers said he ruled the southern mountains with fire and fury, that his word was law and his vengeance was legend. Now he was standing before her, close enough that she could see the faint scar running along his jaw and the eagle feather tied in his braid. "Where are the soldiers?" he demanded in accented English. His voice was low but carried the authority of a man used to command. "There are no soldiers," Evelyn said, trying to stand straight though her knees trembled. "Only travelers." He studied her, the pale skin smudged with dust, the bonnet fallen from her hair, the defiance burning in her blue eyes despite her fear. "You travel without protection?" he asked. "My husband is dead." Caton's gaze didn't soften. "Then you should have stayed with your people," she swallowed. "These were my people." He looked around at the lifeless bodies, then back at her. They were fools to bring a woman into Apache land. She wanted to shout, to curse him for calling them fools, but her throat ached with dust and grief. She whispered instead, "Are you going to kill me?" The Apache king didn't answer. He turned to one of his men and said something in his native tongue. The warrior brought forward a horse. Caton faced her again. "You will come with us." "I won't." His eyes narrowed. "You will." He reached for her wrist, not roughly, but with a grip that left no doubt who held power between them. She tried to pull free, but his strength was unyielding, like the mountains that surrounded them. Evelyn glared up at him. "Why take me?" "Because I must know who you are," he said simply. "And why you crossed into my land." Before she could protest again, he lifted her onto his horse. She gasped, struggling to balance, but his arm came around her waist, steady and firm. They rode into the crimson canyons, leaving the burning wagons behind. Evelyn looked back only once, at the smoke curling into the sky like a funeral pyre for the life she'd lost. She didn't know where he was taking her, or why her pulse quickened every time she felt his heartbeat against her. But she knew one thing for certain. Her journey west had just become something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The canyon walls rose around them like silent sentinels, red cliffs glowing in the late afternoon sun. The wind had calmed, leaving only the soft echo of hoofbeats and Evelyn's shallow breaths. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so alive in her entire life. Catan rode ahead, the picture of calm authority. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, commanding respect not just from his warriors but from the land itself. Evelyn could see why they called him the Apache king. Even the horses obeyed him as if they understood he was their master. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice tight but steady. "Home," he replied. His voice was like gravel, low and unyielding. "Where you will learn to survive." Evelyn swallowed hard. "You mean, keep me prisoner?" He didn't answer at once. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder at her, dark eyes unreadable. "I am not your enemy," he said finally, "but you are in my land. Here my word is law. You will obey it." She bristled, but a small part of her recognized the truth in his tone. She had crossed into the Apache's territory on her own. She had no allies, no weapons, and no place to run. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the dusty trail. Catan's camp came into view, a cluster of dwellings carved into the cliffs, smoke curling gently from small hearths. The Apache people moved with quiet precision, fetching water, tending animals, and weaving baskets. Their discipline and unity struck Evelyn as unlike anything she had ever seen among settlers. Catan dismounted smoothly and extended a hand. "Come," Evelyn hesitated. Pride burned in her chest, but curiosity and a strange sense of safety urged her forward. She climbed down from the horse, the dust from the trail clinging to her skirts, and followed him through the village. A group of children paused in their play to stare at her, whispering in their language. She returned a cautious smile, feeling a pang of longing for the simple warmth of community, something she hadn't realized she had missed. Catan led her to a small dwelling near the cliff's edge. Inside, the air smelled of smoke, clay, and something faintly sweet, herbs perhaps, or dried flowers. It was simple yet surprisingly comfortable. "You will sleep here," he said, gesturing to a mat on the floor. "Your safety is my responsibility tonight." Evelyn's chest tightened. "Safety?" she repeated. "Or imprisonment?" He met her gaze squarely. "Both, if you insist." His eyes softened slightly, just enough to unsettle her. "I do not wish to harm you, but you must learn our ways if you are to survive here." She looked around, noting the walls decorated with carvings, symbols she did not understand. Despite her fear, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of fascination. These people were strong, proud, and alive in ways settlers seldom were. "Learn your ways?" she echoed, her voice skeptical. "You mean, like, cooking and chores?" Catan smiled faintly, a small curve that seemed almost out of place on his otherwise stern face. "No, you will learn more than chores. You will learn respect, for the land, for the people, for yourself. And perhaps, you will learn trust." Evelyn swallowed hard. Trust was a strange word here, whispered between captor and captive, yet it carried weight. She wanted to argue, to resist, but she also sensed that Catan's word was absolute. Defiance might only end in disaster. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the cliffs and carrying with it the scent of sage and pine. Evelyn sat quietly on the mat, her heart racing. She was in the hands of a man she did not understand, in a world she did not belong to. Yet something in her stirred, a dangerous curiosity, a spark she could not extinguish. Catan watched her from the doorway, the shadows of the canyon cloaking his formidable figure. He was a man of immense power. Yet tonight he had chosen not to wield it fully, a test perhaps. Or maybe, he thought silently, it was the first step toward something neither of them yet dared to name. Evelyn felt it too, a silent, tense connection. She didn't trust him, but she couldn't turn away. And for the first time since leaving her husband's grave, she wondered if the West might hold something she had never expected. Hope, danger, and a life worth living, all intertwined. The canyon stretched endlessly ahead, its walls a riot of red and gold streaked with shadow. Evelyn's legs ached from riding all morning, yet she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the stronghold carved into the cliffs, a hidden fortress she had only glimpsed from stories, never imagining she would see it in person. It was breathtaking. The Apache village blended seamlessly into the rock, dwellings and lookouts hewn with precision, ladders of carved wood bridging terraces, smoke rising in thin columns from hearths tucked into the cliffs. The people moved, with quiet efficiency, tending animals, stacking firewood, and weaving baskets, their lives a rhythm honed by generations. Catan led Evelyn through a narrow stone passage that opened onto a terrace overlooking the desert below. From this vantage, she could see miles of sun-baked land, jagged mesas, and distant trails. Her chest tightened, part awe, part unease. This was a world so unlike her own, yet it felt almost alive, like it was breathing with the people who lived here. "You will live among us," Catan said, his tone firm, almost regal. "Not as a prisoner, but as a guest who must learn our ways." Evelyn's brows knitted. "Guest, after capturing me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her closely, noting the tension in her shoulders, the flicker of fire in her blue eyes. "I take what I must to protect my people," he said at last. "You are here now. You may learn, or you may falter." As they descended into the village, Evelyn noticed the small things that revealed a deep, unspoken order. Children helping elders carry water, women tending the gardens with reverence, warriors practicing silently with bows and knives. There was a strength here, quiet, patient, unyielding. A young girl approached, holding a bundle of fresh herbs. She stared at Evelyn, curiosity bright in her dark eyes. Evelyn smiled, tentative, and reached out. The girl hesitated, then pressed the herbs into her hands and darted away, giggling. Ketan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "They are wary at first," he said, "but they will learn you mean no harm if you show respect." Respect. The word echoed in Evelyn's mind. She had lived most of her life in fear, of losing her husband, of being alone, of being powerless in a man's world. Here, she realized, respect was not demanded. It was earned through courage and humility. They stopped before a dwelling carved into the cliffside, its doorway framed with intricate carvings. "This will be your home," Ketan said. "For now. There will be no barriers between you and the people, except the ones you build yourself." Evelyn stepped inside cautiously. The space was simple but functional. A mat for sleeping, a small hearth, and shelves holding pots, dried herbs, and a few woven blankets. The smell of sage and wood smoke was comforting. She set down her small satchel, feeling the weight of her journey settle around her. Outside, Ketan's warriors patrolled the terraces, vigilant yet unobtrusive. He gestured for Evelyn to follow him to the edge of the cliff. The wind whipped at her hair, carrying the scent of juniper and earth. He pointed to the horizon. "From here you see all that is mine to protect. Every step you take in these lands, every choice you make, carries consequence." Evelyn shivered, not from the wind but from the realization that her life had changed irrevocably. She was far from the Kansas plains she had known. Here, in the heart of Apache territory, she was surrounded by a people whose ways she did not yet understand, led by a man whose power and mystery both intimidated and intrigued her. "Do not fear," Ketan said, his voice low and commanding. "Fear is weakness. Strength comes from knowing your place and your purpose." Evelyn met his gaze, and for the first time since the attack on her caravan, she felt a spark of determination. She would not simply survive. She would learn, adapt, and perhaps in time, claim a place in this fortress carved from stone and fire. The sun sank behind the mesas, painting the cliffs in blood-red light. Evelyn watched in silence as shadows stretched across the village. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet resolve settled over her. She would face whatever came next. The customs, the challenges, and the man who had brought her here, and she would not falter. Ketan observed her from a few paces away, his expression inscrutable. Beneath the stern exterior, he sensed the first stirrings of something unusual: respect, courage, and perhaps even fascination. And in that moment, the desert fortress was no longer just a stronghold. It was the beginning of a world Evelyn would have to conquer, not with violence but with heart, wit, and courage. The morning sun struck the red cliffs like fire, turning the village into a shimmering tapestry of gold and copper. Evelyn moved among the dwellings, trying to observe without seeming intrusive. She had already noticed the quiet harmony of the people, their routines precise, their movements purposeful. But as much as she admired them, she refused to bow without question. Ketan found her at the edge of the terrace, staring down at the desert below. "You must begin today," he said. "Learn the ways of my people, respect their work, their customs, their rules." "I don't belong here," she said sharply, turning to meet his dark eyes. "I am not one of your people. I will not pretend to be." Ketan studied her, silent, his expression unreadable. The sun glinted off the obsidian beads in his hair. "You are here," he said finally, "and here you will stay. The question is whether you will learn, or you will falter." Evelyn's pride flared. She clenched her fists, feeling a rush of defiance. "I will not falter," she said, her voice strong. "But I will do nothing you do not ask." Caton raised an eyebrow, the smallest trace of amusement flickering across his stern features. "Very well," he said. "Then we shall see." The day passed in a blur of activity. Evelyn was introduced to cooking over an open flame, weaving baskets, and fetching water from the spring. Each task challenged her in ways she had never imagined. Her hands blistered, her muscles ached, but she refused to complain. Yet every time she completed a task, Caton observed her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster than it should have. There was no cruelty in his gaze, only scrutiny, as if he were weighing her spirit. When she faltered during the weaving, Caton approached silently. "Do not force it," he said. "The work requires patience. Strength alone will not suffice." "I know," she muttered, frustration curling in her chest. "I can do this. I will do this." He nodded once, turning away, and for a moment she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She was learning, but on her terms. Later, when the other women returned from the fields, Caton summoned her to a small gathering. "The people will teach you now," he said. "Not I." Evelyn felt a flicker of relief. Yet as the villagers approached, she realized that respect would not come freely. The women eyed her warily, whispering in their language. She caught the faintest smile on a young girl's lips and a spark of encouragement, but the older women's gazes were stern. One of the elder women, a striking figure with silver hair braided along her back, stepped forward. "You are brave," she said in halting English, "but you must show more than courage. You must show humility." Evelyn's chest tightened. Humility was not a trait she had worn often, but she nodded. "I will try," she said, honestly. The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you may stay." Caton observed from the terrace, his arms crossed. Evelyn felt the weight of his gaze, and though she refused to let it control her, a strange tension wound itself around her chest. She could not deny the pull, the curiosity, the fascination, the dangerous admiration that lingered whenever he was near. As the sun sank low over the cliffs, painting the desert in crimson and amber, Evelyn allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had defied him, yes, yet she had survived the day, had learned something about the people and even about herself. Caton approached, the crunch of his boots against the earth echoing in the quiet. He stopped beside her, silent, and for a moment the only sound was the whisper of wind through the cliffs. "You have spirit," he said finally. "But spirit alone is not enough. You must learn patience, respect, and balance." "I will," she replied, her chin lifted, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I may not be your people, Caton, but I will not break. Not for you, not for anyone." For the first time, Caton smiled, faint, rare, but unmistakable. He saw in her a strength that mirrored his own, a fire that could not be tamed. And though he would never admit it aloud, the defiance in her eyes sparked something within him he had not felt in years. Fascination, respect, and perhaps the first stirrings of desire. The desert winds whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. In that quiet moment neither spoke, yet both understood something profound. This was only the beginning of challenges, of understanding, and of a bond neither of them could yet name. The sky turned a bruised purple as evening fell over the cliffs, the first rumble of distant thunder vibrating through the desert air. Evelyn had just returned from the fields, exhausted but proud of herself. She had carried water, repaired a fence, and even helped weave baskets alongside the women of the village. Each task felt like a small victory, proof that she could survive in this strange, demanding world. But the air carried a warning. The wind shifted, swirling around the cliffs, tugging at her skirts and sending a chill down her spine. Caton had already sensed it. The warriors moved silently across the terraces, securing the village, tying down supplies, and signaling to one another in gestures Evelyn couldn't understand. "You must stay inside tonight," Caton said, appearing at her doorway like a shadow. His presence was commanding, yet not unkind. "The storm will not wait for anyone." Evelyn glanced at the darkening sky, the clouds rolling in like an approaching army. She wanted to protest, to insist she could handle herself, but she realized that here, her defiance might cost more than pride. She nodded. "I will." Caton did not leave her immediately. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him to a small shelter built into the cliffside, a place he had prepared for situations like this. It was simple, with a low wooden table, a hearth, and a narrow mat for sleeping. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying sand and the scent of wet earth as distant lightning illuminated the canyon walls in jagged flashes. "You are frightened," Caton observed. His voice softer than usual. "I am," she admitted, "but not for myself. For the village, for the people you protect. I've seen what a storm can do in the desert. It can destroy everything." Caton studied her, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. "You think like a warrior," he said. "And yet you do not understand the strength of these people." "I want to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to understand." The storm grew louder, rattling the walls of the shelter. Rain lashed against the cliffs. Thunder shook the ground, and the wind howled like a living creature. Evelyn huddled close to the hearth, trying to ignore the fear building in her chest. Caton sat across from her, silent, watching the flames dance and flare. Hours passed in tense quiet. Every crack of thunder made Evelyn jump, yet she found herself glancing at him again and again. There was a calmness about him she could not explain, an unspoken assurance that, for all his fearsome reputation, he would protect the village, and perhaps even her. "You must learn patience," Caton said finally, breaking the silence. "Nature will not bend for your wishes. Neither will the desert nor my people. I'm learning," she said, determination threading her voice, "even if it kills me." Caton's eyes softened slightly, the shadows of the storm reflecting across his face. "Good," he said. "You have spirit. That is why you will survive here." The storm raged on, and Evelyn felt a strange sense of comfort in the shared quiet. They were alone together, yet not. The wind outside might have been fierce and wild, but inside there was a fragile, unspoken connection. She realized that for the first time since her husband's death, she did not feel entirely alone. As the night deepened, Caton rose and stepped to the doorway, looking out at the lightning-lit cliffs. "You will sleep here tonight," he said, gesturing to the mat. "Not because you are weak, but because you are learning. Strength is not only measured by action, but by wisdom." Evelyn nodded, lying down on the mat, her eyes tracing the lines of the shelter and the flickering shadows on the walls. She felt the storm outside as a distant threat, something powerful but controllable, like the lessons she was learning from Caton, and she realized something startling. She was beginning to trust him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel that the desert, and the man who ruled it, might not be enemies after all. Caton returned to the hearth, sitting across from her once more. Neither spoke for hours, the storm outside their cocoon. Yet in the silence, Evelyn felt a bond forming, subtle but undeniable. A bond that would grow, testing her courage, her heart, and the very limits of the life she thought she knew. The desert raged outside, but inside, a fragile peace had taken root, one that neither wind, thunder, nor fear could easily destroy. The morning sun broke over the cliffs like a promise. Evelyn had slept fitfully on the mat in the shelter, the storm from the previous night leaving a crisp scent of rain and sage in the air. She rose with determination, brushing the dust from her skirts and preparing herself for another day in a world that still felt both foreign and mesmerizing. Caton was already outside, walking among the warriors and villagers, issuing silent commands with gestures so subtle they seemed almost like ritual. When he saw Evelyn, he nodded once. "Today you will observe," he said. "Learn what is not taught by words but by actions." Evelyn followed him quietly. The village was alive in ways she had not fully noticed before, a delicate balance of strength and care. Children played in the dirt, carrying water and helping with small chores, while older women tended gardens and prepared food with a rhythm that seemed almost sacred. It was then that she saw him. A young boy, no more than 10, sitting by the edge of the terrace, his leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. His eyes brimmed with tears, and he clutched a small bundle to his chest as he whimpered. "Caton," Evelyn said, hurrying to him. "What happened?" "The boy fell from the cliff," Caton said, his tone neutral but his gaze sharp. "He is in pain. Do you know how to help him?" Evelyn's heart clenched. She had nursed her husband in sickness, tended to injured neighbors, and learned the rudimentary skills of frontier medicine. But this was different. These people were strangers. Their methods, their remedies, their way of life, she knew none of it. "I will try," she said, kneeling beside the boy. Katan did not intervene. He stood silently, arms crossed, watching as she carefully examined the twisted leg. She whispered soothing words, trying to mask her fear with calm authority. The boy flinched, then relaxed slightly under her gentle touch. Evelyn found herbs in her bag, a combination of sage, willow bark, and clean water, and fashioned a simple poultice. She wrapped the boy's leg carefully, murmuring encouragement as she worked. The other villagers watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. When she finished, the boy's eyes met hers, wide and trusting. He gave a faint smile, and Evelyn felt a wave of relief. She had done more than heal the injury. She had earned the first spark of trust. Katan approached then, his shadow falling over her and the boy. "You have a gift," he said almost softly. "Compassion is as powerful as any weapon." Evelyn straightened, brushing dust from her hands. "I only did what anyone would do," she said, though her voice carried pride she could not entirely conceal. Katan's gaze lingered on her. He saw not only her skill but her courage, the way she had acted without hesitation, without fear of failure, and without seeking approval. For the first time he realized that her presence in his village might not be a mistake after all. "You are learning," he said finally, his voice carrying a rare warmth, "and the people notice. They will respect you if you continue this path." Evelyn glanced around. She saw villagers nodding subtly, children hiding smiles, and the elder women observing with guarded curiosity. It was not full acceptance, but it was a start. As the day progressed, Evelyn tended to small tasks and injuries, each success weaving her more tightly into the rhythm of the village. Katan remained nearby, sometimes offering instruction, sometimes simply watching, his silence speaking more than words ever could. By sunset, the boy ran off to play again, his laughter carrying across the terraces like music. Evelyn exhaled, feeling the exhaustion in her muscles, yet also a deep satisfaction. She had done something meaningful here, something that mattered to people who had once seemed so distant and unyielding. Katan stood beside her as they watched the sun dip behind the mesas. "You are not like the women who pass through these lands," he said quietly. "You see, you act and you care. That is rare. That is valuable." Evelyn's heart skipped, a strange flutter she did not yet understand. She had begun to earn his respect, and perhaps something more. For the first time, she felt that she might not only survive here, but find a place where her heart could grow alongside her courage. The desert stretched in gold and shadow before them, a world of danger, beauty, and challenge. Evelyn realized that healing was not just for the body, it was for the soul. And tonight, under the watchful gaze of the Apache king, she felt that her soul had begun to heal as well. The evening was quiet, broken only by the crackle of the small fire outside Katan's dwelling. Evelyn sat nearby, her hands folded in her lap, watching the flames dance across the cliff walls. The village below was settling in for the night, children's laughter fading, fires dimming, and the desert settling into a hushed, expectant silence. Katan stood a few feet away, gazing at the horizon, his silhouette rigid against the setting sun. For days, Evelyn had felt the weight of his presence, commanding, unyielding, and yet strangely protective. Tonight, though, there was a subtle tension in his stance, a quiet that seemed almost human. "You have grown accustomed to this place," he said finally, without turning. "I have learned," Evelyn replied carefully, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Not everything, but enough to survive." Katan nodded slowly. "And yet you still carry fear. Not for yourself, but for others." Evelyn swallowed. "I cannot help it. I've seen what storms and battles and mistakes can do. I've lost everything once. I will not see more innocent lives harmed if I can prevent it." Katan's dark eyes finally turned toward her. In their depths was a shadow she hadn't seen before, a weight, a sorrow. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Someone I lost." Evelyn tilted her head, curious. "Who?" "My wife," he said, the words heavy and reluctant. "She was taken from me by men like your husband's regiment. I could not stop it." The words landed in Evelyn's chest like a thunderclap. Her breath caught. Her husband, the man she had mourned, had been part of the unit that attacked Caton's people. The realization hit her with a painful, twisting force. I didn't know, she whispered, guilt and grief battling inside her. He was my husband, but her voice faltered. I never wanted harm to come to your people. Caton's gaze softened slightly, though the shadow of pain remained. I do not blame you, Evelyn, but you must understand why I am wary. You represent a world that has caused me deep loss, and yet you have stayed. You have learned. You have shown compassion. Evelyn's throat tightened. I did not stay to betray you. I came here to survive. And now, I care. About your people, about this land, about you. Her words trembled, fragile yet honest. For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. Caton's jaw clenched as he wrestled with the conflict inside him. Anger, grief, duty, and an undeniable fascination for the woman who had shown courage, defiance and empathy in equal measure. Finally, he stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against her. I have held anger for many years, he admitted, his voice low and intense. But what you have shown, your courage, your heart, it reminds me that not all who bear the uniform of my enemies are without honor. Not all are without soul. Evelyn felt a strange relief, mingled with fear and desire. Then what happens now? She asked softly, unsure whether she wanted the answer. Caton looked away toward the cliffs and the fading light. Now, we continue. You must learn and I must trust. Trust is not given freely and it is not earned lightly. But you have begun to earn it. Her heart thudded. Trust. A word heavier than any sword. A word that, if fully realized, might bind her to this man in ways she could not yet name. Evelyn nodded, meeting his gaze with as much courage as she could muster. I will earn it. I promise. Caton studied her, the firelight reflecting in his obsidian eyes. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Then perhaps, he murmured, you are not only here to learn from us. Perhaps we are learning from you as well. The desert stretched out beneath them, quiet and endless, carrying both the weight of past sorrows and the fragile promise of something new. In that moment, Evelyn and Caton stood together, two souls shaped by loss, defiance, and courage, beginning a fragile journey toward trust, understanding, and perhaps something more. The first light of dawn crept over the cliffs, painting the desert in pale gold and pink. Evelyn stirred in her mat, her body tense with unease. Something in the air felt off. The wind carried an unfamiliar scent, sharp and acrid, and the distant echo of hooves sent a chill down her spine. She rushed outside and saw Caton already on the terrace, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The warriors were assembling silently, bows in hand, knives gleaming, eyes sharp. Evelyn's stomach churned. Whatever was coming, it was not a simple storm or desert threat. Soldiers, Caton said, his voice low but firm. Your people are in danger. They come for the Apache, but I know why. Evelyn's heart sank. Soldiers? She whispered. Her mind raced. Could they be the same regiment her late husband served in? The ones tied to Caton's past? Caton's jaw tightened. Yes, they will not respect these lands. They will not respect my people. We must act. Before Evelyn could protest, the first riders appeared, descending into the valley below like a tide of steel. Dust and chaos followed them, and screams rose from the village. Villagers scrambled to protect children and livestock. Evelyn, Caton said, urgency in his tone. You must warn the others. Lead the women and children to the inner cliffs. Evelyn nodded, adrenaline surging. She grabbed a small bundle of supplies, water, dried food, and bandages, and ran to the women, directing them with authority that surprised even herself. The villagers, trusting the stranger who had healed their children and tended their wounds, followed her without question. As she moved, Caton rode out to meet the soldiers. The clash was immediate. Arrows flew, dust swirled, and the desert seemed to erupt with sound and fury. Caton moved like a force of nature, commanding his warriors with precision and ferocity. Evelyn watched from the safety of the inner cliffs, her heart in her throat as she saw the man she had begun to respect, to admire, in full battle. Her fear was sharp, but so was her resolve. She could not sit idle. With the courage she had honed over weeks of survival, she returned to the village to assist the defenders, carrying water to the injured, passing bandages, and helping children to safe spots. Every action she took earned her nods of acknowledgement from the villagers. their trust in her growing with each heartbeat. The battle raged for hours. Ketan's warriors were skilled, disciplined, and tireless, but the soldiers pressed relentlessly. Evelyn's lungs burned, her hands were raw, and yet she moved with focus and clarity she hadn't known she possessed. Then, amidst the chaos, Ketan's attention shifted. He saw Evelyn at risk, a soldier charging toward her position. Without hesitation, he rode like the desert wind, intercepting the man with a skillful strike that sent him sprawling into the dust. He dismounted, taking Evelyn's hands in his, gripping them firmly. "You must trust me," he said, his voice commanding yet calm. "I do," Evelyn whispered, though her heart still raced. Together, they directed the villagers to safety, moving through the smoke, sand, and shouts. The soldiers, seeing the disciplined resistance, began to falter. Ketan's warriors pressed forward, driving them back with skill and unity that no outsider could break. By sunset, the attackers had been repelled, retreating into the desert, leaving behind scattered equipment and confusion. The village was battered but intact, and the people slowly emerged from hiding, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Ketan stood beside Evelyn, his hand brushing hers in a rare, fleeting touch. "You fought well," he said almost quietly. "Bravery is more than surviving storms. It is standing for those who cannot stand alone." Evelyn looked into his dark eyes, the respect and unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. She had faced fear, chaos, and danger, yet she had survived, and not alone. Ketan's gaze lingered on her. "You are no longer just a guest," he said. "You are part of this people, and part of me." Evelyn's breath caught. She had earned their trust, survived the attack, and now stood at the center of a bond that neither desert nor battle could sever. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying dust, smoke, and the unspoken promise of something far greater. Hope, courage, and a connection that had begun in fear, but had grown into respect and perhaps love. The desert was quiet in the early morning, the cliffs glowing soft gold as the sun rose over the horizon. Evelyn stood on the terrace, her gaze sweeping across the village below, now peaceful after the chaos of the previous day. Her heart was heavy with conflicting emotions. She had survived storms, attacks, and cultural challenges, and she had proven herself to the Apache people. Yet now a new challenge loomed, a choice she had never expected to face. Ketan approached silently, as he always did, his presence commanding yet strangely gentle. "You have grown strong," he said. "The people respect you. You have earned their trust." Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. "I know," she admitted, "but I still belong to another world. My home, my family, and my life as it was, is far from here. I cannot forget it." Ketan's gaze softened, the obsidian depths of his eyes reflecting the morning sun. "And yet you have learned to survive here, to care, to heal, and to lead. Your heart has found a place among my people, whether you acknowledge it or not." Evelyn's chest tightened. She had grown to love this land, the strength of its people, and even Ketan himself, though she struggled to name the feeling stirring within her. She thought of the village children laughing, the women working alongside her, and Ketan's unwavering presence through storms and battles alike. Could she truly leave all of this behind? The wind swept through the cliffs, tugging at her skirts as if urging her toward a decision. She turned to Ketan, searching his face for any clue of what he wanted her to choose. "You do not have to choose now," he said, reading her uncertainty. "But understand this. The life you left behind cannot undo what has begun here. The people, the land, and I have come to rely on you, and you rely on us." Evelyn's heart beat faster. Reliance, trust, bond. Words heavy with meaning, ones she had never allowed herself to consider with another man, especially not one so different from the life she had known. Yet Ketan had shown her patience, guidance, and a rare vulnerability beneath his strength. "I never expected any of this," she said softly. "When I came here, I only wanted to survive. Now," her voice faltered as she struggled to find the words, "now I feel part of something I cannot leave behind." Ketan stepped closer, the tension between them palpable. "Then you must decide," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "Do you return to a world that has forgotten you, or do you embrace a life you have fought to be part of?" Evelyn's gaze fell to the village below, the people she had healed, guided and earned respect from were her life now in ways she could not have imagined. She thought of Ketan's unwavering strength, his quiet guidance, and the way he had trusted her, and allowed her to trust him in return. Her hand brushed the edge of the terrace, the wind whipping around her, carrying the scent of sage and earth. She began, her voice trembling. I cannot go back to the life I knew. It no longer belongs to me. My place is here. Ketan's expression softened, and for the first time a full, rare smile touched his lips. Then you have chosen wisely, he said. He extended his hand to her, not as a captor but as a partner equal in strength and heart. Evelyn took his hand, feeling the warmth and certainty of his grip. She no longer feared the unknown, and she embraced it. The cliffs, the village, the people, and the man who had shown her courage, compassion, and passion were now her world. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a symbol of both challenge and freedom, and for the first time Evelyn understood that home was not always where one begins, but often where one chooses to stand, to fight, and to love. Ketan looked into her eyes, the depth of his feelings mirrored in her own. You are mine, he said softly, not as a claim but as a declaration of bond and devotion. Evelyn smiled, her heart soaring. And you are mine, she replied, the words carrying the weight of trust, respect, and the beginnings of love. Together, they stood on the terrace, hands entwined, facing the desert, not as captive and captor, not as outsider and chief, but as partners in a life they would build together. One choice, one moment, one heartbeat at a time. The desert sun rose like molten gold over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the village. Today was not a day for work, nor for training, nor for fear. Today was a day for celebration, a day marking the bond between two worlds, two people, and the life they had forged together. Evelyn stood at the edge of the terrace, her hair braided in the Apache style, adorned with feathers and beads that the village women had carefully placed. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had crossed storms, battles, and doubt to reach this moment, and now the life she had fought for, and the man she had come to love, awaited her. Ketan emerged from the shadows of the cliffs, dressed in ceremonial attire that marked his rank as chief. His presence was commanding as always, but his eyes softened when they met hers. There was no authority here, no tension, only the quiet certainty of two hearts that had endured, survived, and chosen one another. The villagers gathered, forming a circle around the cliff's edge. Children peered with wide eyes. Warriors stood tall and silent, and the women who had first greeted her with suspicion now smiled warmly. They had witnessed her courage, her compassion, and her growth, and today they acknowledged her as one of their own. Ketan extended his hand. Evelyn, he said, his voice resonant with the power of the cliffs themselves. You have chosen this land, these people, and me. Do you swear to stand with us, to protect, to love, and to endure as one of our own? Evelyn's heart pounded. She thought of the hardships, the storms, the battles, the nights of fear, and the days of triumph. She thought of Ketan's unwavering strength, his rare vulnerability, and the way he had trusted her when trust was scarce. I do, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I choose this land, these people, and you. My heart, my life, and my loyalty are yours. A murmur of approval ran through the village, soft but affirming. The chief's warriors nodded, the women smiled, and the children clapped in quiet excitement. Evelyn felt a surge of belonging, a feeling she had never known until now. Ketan lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both tender and reverent. Then you are mine, he said, as I am yours. Together we will endure, protect, and thrive. Evelyn stepped closer, her heart brimming with courage and love. Together, she repeated, sealing the bond not only with words, but with the steady beating of two hearts finally in harmony. The elders began a quiet ceremony, singing in the old language, weaving symbols of protection and unity into the air around them. The wind carried their voices across the cliffs, through the terraces, and into the canyon beyond. Evelyn felt the energy, the history, and the legacy of the Apache people wrap around her like a mantle. Ketan guided her to stand beside him, their hands entwined. You are now part of us, he said, not by obligation but by choice. And in that choice you have shown the courage of the strongest warriors and the heart of the bravest women. Evelyn smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She had survived deserts, storms, and war. She had endured doubt, fear, and grief. And now, in this moment, she was home. Not in the world she had known, but in the world she had chosen. The ceremony concluded with the raising of hands, a symbolic gesture of unity. Caton's people surrounded them in quiet celebration, acknowledging the bond that would shape their lives, their village, and the land for years to come. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the cliffs and desert in light, Evelyn and Caton stood together on the terrace, hands still entwined, hearts still racing. They were no longer captive and chief, outsider and warrior, or stranger and protector. They were partners, bound by choice, respect, trust, and love. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a symbol of challenge, endurance, and freedom. And together, Evelyn and Caton faced it not as individuals but as one, ready to write the next chapter of their lives in a land that had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately united them. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying with it a promise of love, courage, and a future forged not by fate, but by two hearts daring to choose each other. Evelyn rested her head against Caton's shoulder, feeling the strength and warmth of the man who had changed her life forever, and for the first time she knew she was truly home.